Well, you make a great point there too, that even though it's your right to ask for a bench trial, it's not a coincidence that a growing majority of police officers and departments request bench trials, because those judges are not completely objective people in robes. They're in many cases politicians who were elected or who were appointed by political leaders. Yep. They have a very strong deference to police departments and police authority. I believe in most cases where there is a bench trial of a police officer, even off duty like this, they're acquitted. So it does say quite a bit that police officers don't feel the need to face a jury of their peers, because in many ways they feel like they shouldn't be policed by regular people. And that says quite a bit about where they are.
Yep, and it says a lot about where we are as well. Dear brother, always a pleasure having you on the program. Tell people how they can follow you and check out your great work.
You can check me out on Rebel HQ or on Twitter at @VMaxBurns. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure. All right, remember, take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of the planet. Remember, the truth is always indisputable.
Universal health care, raising the minimum wage. If you want clean water, clean air, clean food, people. If you are doing the deed, I want you to stand up to your feet right now. We have courage enough, conviction enough, people power enough to stand up and do what is right for ourselves. I am unbought and unbossed.
Hello and welcome to Unbossed. I am your host, Nina Turner. So glad you are here with us today. And later on in the show, we will have with us in the co-host chair, none other than Francesca Fiorentini. But before Francesca joins us, I am so excited to have a magnificent interview about the issue of military, the issues of the United States, and the issues of why is it that we as human beings are always seeking out war in some countries more than others. So I have with me Norm Solomon, and his book, War Made Invisible, has been published by the New Press. It's a searing expose of how the American military, with the help of the media, conceals its perpetual wars. Now, Norman Solomon is the co-founder of Roots Action. Please go look them up and support this organization. And he is the executive director of the Institute for Public Accuracy. He is an author, an activist, and a humanitarian. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with Norman on many, many projects. He is a pusher of peace on a mission for justice. Norman, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us on Unbossed to talk about your new book.
I'm so glad to talk with you and the entire Unbossed audience.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And so we want to put up a cover of your book. We want our viewers to see the book right here. This is it. War Made Invisible, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. And Norman, I started reading the book and I am a quote, I just love quotes so much. And there are three very deep quotes at the beginning of your book, one of which really struck me, and it reads, the propagandist's purpose is to make one set of people forget that certain other sets of people are human. Oh my God. And that's Hughley, 1936. Norman, tell us a little bit about why that quote. There are two by Hughley, and there's another one by someone else. All of them were absolutely riveting, but that one stuck out for me the most. And then I have another one that I'm sure you're familiar with from the great 20th century Unionist Asa Philip Randolph. But why this quote, why those three quotes in particular, and talk to us about how they set up the foundational premises of your book.
Well, that quote really blew me away when I read it, and I thought, I gotta start the book this way, because it really is the way in which, whether we talk about across town or across the country or around the world, the injustice gets reinforced. And this objectification of other people. Oh, you're not like us. You don't matter as much. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's overt. But as Martin Luther King said, the spending on military is what he called, and I'm quoting here, a demonic suction tube that takes away resources from healthcare, education, housing, elderly care, children care, so much other. And really, I think it's an example of how when we don't take all of humanity seriously, what goes around comes around. Because if you have a country, as unfortunate we do, based on injustice, then a lot of the same attitudes and power structure inferences and leverage is replicated in foreign policy. And I think that's where we have this disconnect between social movements in the United States that are really fighting the power, that are really fighting for people, avoiding foreign policy when really we're all one humanity. We got 7 or 8 billion people on this planet. What goes around comes around, whether it's climate emergency, whether it's COVID, whether it's overall health of people on the planet.
That's exactly right. And I think our country, more than any other, because of our hegemonic positioning, and we also know what goes up must come down. I mean, we might not always be in a hegemonic position, but we are right now. But certainly when you are in a hegemonic position, it causes a bit of arrogance. And sometimes that arrogance can blur a lot of lines and cause us to act collectively. When I say us, I'm saying as a nation collectively in ways that if we did not have a hegemonic positioning in the world, we would not necessarily act. And sometimes forget some basic premises, some basic principles, such as when Dr. King said, what happens to one directly happens to us all indirectly, or that we all are intertwined. And certainly if nothing reminded us of that, this COVID-19, the pandemic should have seared that in our minds, that we are connected in every single way. And it is just a matter of time for chaos or goodness to come at our door. If it's at somebody else's door, it's not a lifetime away, it will absolutely happen. So the other quote that I think is foundational, even though you didn't use this in your book, is Asa Philip Randolph, one of the greatest 20th century unionists and civil rights leaders. And this, we know that war making is really all about the money. Make wars unprofitable and you make them impossible. Again, that's Asa Philip Randolph. He led the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. He was very instrumental in pushing FDR to desegregate the military. He threatened to march on Washington in the 1940s, just all around good freedom fighter. But Norman, that's really what this is coming down to in so many ways, is gluttony and greed. And the war-making machine is in full control, as we see. So now, can you speak to, more than 20 years ago and 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan set into motion a hugely consequential shift in American foreign policy, a perpetual state of war. And this is what you write about in your book. Can you speak to 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan being, why were those two things, or why did those two things present such a consequential shift, as you put it?
The terrible crime of 9/11, killing 3,000 people, in the media spin and the politics of Washington, gave a sort of a preemptive absolution to anything the United States would do. And that worked politically, it worked in the media, it worked psychologically, that the United States really, for the first time in memory, perhaps since the Civil War, had suffered this terrible, fairly large scale killing on 9/11. And so the United States, which, to put it rather crudely, is accustomed to dishing it out, but not taking it with murderous actions around the world, that was a blank check. And another way to put it, it was a political license to kill. And so weeks after 9/11, the United States attacked Afghanistan. And when you look at the numbers, and this is predictable, I quoted people in the book who said it at the time, the US would end up slaughtering vastly more numbers of people than had occurred on 9/11. And this is sort of an attitude that, for every one of us, we're gonna kill 100 of you, which is really not far off from the ratio of what took place. The Cost of War Project at Brown University documents close to 1 million people directly killed by the US so-called war on terror. And that doesn't account for every one of those, several others indirectly: water supplies, healthcare, infrastructure, decimating several countries, Afghanistan included, Iraq, Libya. These are crimes against humanity. And the United States is not the only government to do that, but it certainly is one of the main ones, if not the main one, in the 21st century. So it's, long story short, we've got to fess up. The scholar Edward Said on the Middle East said, at the very least, we need remorse.
Yeah.
We don't have remorse right now, and we'd better get it on the table so we can turn this around.
That's right, because what goes around comes around. And to that point, now, how has the United States gotten away with hiding the human toll of its military machine?
Power, silence, arrogance, hubris, the leverage of the propaganda levers of power, major media, and the dehumanization of others. One of the main themes of the book, and really an impetus for me to write it, was I felt hidden in plain sight was this attitude that there are two tiers of grief, ours and theirs. Ours, which really is, of course, humanly valid. Look what happened at 9/11. Look at what happened, several thousand American troops dying in Iraq, the grieving families, the loved ones. That's part of humanity. We all have suffered it to some extent. As time goes on, we lose a loved one. That is what is part of what makes us human. So that's the tier of grief that is validated and affirmed. But there's another tier of grief. Yeah. People at the other end of US missiles and bombs. And tacitly or explicitly, through the silence and through the short shrift of coverage, the message from media and politics, I'm talking NBC, CBS, NPR, and also I'm talking Capitol Hill and the White House. That tier of grief, no big deal, doesn't matter, virtual non-persons.
Yeah, and once you start to dehumanize people, that's it right there. We really have lost all hope. Why is that you think the American people, so you talked about the media and that you explore a lot, that component of it, that the media is complicit, in allowing this country get away with it, or not telling the American people the absolute truth about the toll of war or perpetual wars that are happening all over the country. Is that part of the American psyche now, Norman, at this point? We as a nation, the whole notion of manifest destiny, to your point, God has chosen us. So obviously God didn't choose anybody else. It's all about us. And if we step in, we have God on our side. Everybody, every world leader, when they're, especially when they're war making, they believe that God is on their side. Is there something about that mentality, particularly in the American psyche, that may cause the American people to really have a callous indifference towards the suffering of other people and other people's children, other people's communities?
I think it's especially prevalent among white Americans. And the history of the United States, based on white supremacy, still many, many manifestations of it, leads us to this arrogance that somehow the United States is the light unto the world. I quote, and unfortunately we have women and people of color in leadership positions sometimes who have taken up this attitude as well. I, in the book, quote Lyndon Johnson, and he says to Vietnam troops, "You are compassionate. You're doing compassionate work here in the war in Vietnam." And then you fast forward, and almost in the same kind of speech, Barack Obama says that to the troops in Afghanistan. "You're here to help people. You are compassionate."
Yeah. And we destroyed these people's countries that still have not been rebuilt in a way that we would find acceptable as a nation. And but by the grace of God, there go us. We could be Iraq, like the roles could definitely be reversed. And I don't think a lot of times we think about that. And this country, we continue to feed the military machine, and Americans are psyched out thinking that the more we spend, the safer we are. But on the other side of the ledger, Norman, we neglect domestic issues, as you were naming in a certain part of the earlier part of a question that you answered. I want to share this graphic with our viewers just to remind them. I've shared this many, many times on this show, but the United States spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. And put Norman up, and let's keep the graph up, please. And as we can see, most of the nations, though, in that list are allies of ours in some form or fashion, yet we spend more money than all of these nations combined. And it seems, Norman, that in DC these days, and maybe days in the past as well, the only thing, the major thing that the two political duopolies can agree on is continuing to enrich the military industrial complex. Can you share with the viewers why they should care about what is done in our name, number one, and number two, how those resources could be better deployed domestically and for peacemaking all across the world? And that in and of itself would help us to be a safer nation and a safer world.
As you said, what goes around comes around. Saying to people in the rest of the world, do as we say, not as we do. In the long run, that's not going to wash too well. When we have a majority of close to 60% of the federal discretionary budget going to war and preparation for war in the Pentagon, then there's not much left, and we're left fighting over scraps. And whereas with domestic policy, not as big a difference as I wish there was between the Democratic and Republican parties, but a real difference on many, many issues between Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill on domestic issues. And yet, as you say, when you get beyond, as the saying goes, beyond the water's edge, foreign policy, militarism, they're in lockstep. And Biden says he's thrilled to sign one exorbitant military budget after another. And when these expenditures are literally taking food out of the mouths of children, we have a moral crisis, a spiritual, as Dr. King said, approaching spiritual death. And frankly, sometimes I'm afraid we've gotten there.
Oh no, we're there. We're there. I mean, this is the world that Dr. King and so many others in different ways warned us about, and we're there. And if we don't capture ourselves, if we don't have a reckoning and a recognition, as you said earlier about this, it's only gonna get worse. In my closing question, I wanna bring in Daniel Ellsberg. I know, we both know he recently died on June 16th. He is best known for leaking the Pentagon Papers and exposing the United States' role and lies to the American people about the Vietnam War. He is, however, known in the peace movement circles as an opponent of forever wars and a crusader for peace. Talk to us about your relationship with him, how he influenced you. And I know that you wrote a piece in Common Dreams about him, but he certainly was a great man, a bright light, and his spirit continues to live on.
For me and so many people who were able to get to know him and work with him, it was just so elevating. I feel now Daniel Ellsberg Presente still with us. And he had a generosity of spirit that I think came out of his remorse. He was part of the war machine. He had the Pentagon Papers, unlike everybody else. He shared it with the world. So for 52 years, the last 52 of his life, he was into affirming life, protecting and challenging the warfare state. And for me, I still feel he's with me, he's with us. And we need each other to elevate the possibilities of the future.
Yeah, we do. The possibilities of a future, a possibility of peace. And he did say about the Vietnam War, quote, it wasn't that we were on the wrong side, we were the wrong side. And it's so good that he had an epiphany and that he, in the last 52 years of his life, he used all that he knew to really be a crusader for peace. Oh my God, Norman Solomon, it was so great to have you here on the show. Let's put Norman's book back up. War Made Invisible, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. And Norman, how can folks find you on social media and how can they find this book?
Well, the book's online now, the usual sellers. I'm glad to hear from everybody. I have a website at normansolomon.com and you can email me straight from there.
Oh, thank you, Norman. Thank you for all the great work that you continue to do in this atmosphere. We really appreciate you being a crusader for peace as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And we'll be right back after this.
Welcome to Indisputable. I'm your host, Dr. Rashad Richard. We got a lot happening today. But what do we do on this show? We tell the truth. You know why we tell the truth? Because the truth is simply indisputable.
Rashad, great to be here. Congratulations on the new show. And I got to let everybody know that Rashad and I go way back.
Here's the pattern that we see in all of these Karen stories. They think they own stuff they do not own. Now, where does that come from? I don't know. Maybe slavery. Maybe they think they should still own black people.
This is what happens when Karens weaponize the police.
When you're used to privilege, equality seems like oppression.
It hits you in a certain way when someone is holding you against your will, treating you like you're a criminal and you're an innocent person. This is something that black people face no matter where they are.
A stronger black economy lends itself to a stronger, greater economy. Don't think it's exclusive of you, it's inclusive of you.
What's your beef with critical race theory?
It adds more fuel to the fire of the racist tendencies that we already have.
We have a generation of problem solvers that can remedy the problem if they are properly taught what the problem is.
You know who created redlining in this country? It was a white liberal.
I don't give a damn who created it. If it's a racist policy, Shelley, here's what I don't know. I don't know. See, there you go filibustering, brother. You're scared of this truth, but you're gonna get it though.
Climate is changing fundamentally, extremely, and non-linearly. It's becoming worse now. It's not when the levees burst that is the problem. It's in the anticipation of that.
So I hope every human being is safe. And by human beings, I do not include multinational corporations, especially the ones that started climate change in the first place.
What we're currently doing right now in cutting emissions is clearly not enough. There will be ramifications to what Trump is doing. I don't want people to suffer, but I feel like there's gonna be a lot of suffering because we have an imbecile as our leader.
And welcome back to the show. Hopefully you enjoyed that interview with Norman Solomon, War Made Invisible. Please make sure you support Norman and his work and get that book. And speaking of books and reading, do you get the progress report? You want to get the progress report in your email every single day. It is a progressive take on what is happening in the world, so get it. Particularly our world here in the United States, but get the progress report. Progressive news and inspiration every weekday morning. You don't want to miss it. Just go ahead and take your smartphone and capture that Q code and voila, baby, you are in. Now to my absolute favorite part of the show. We are going to Twitch first. Jackson. Hey, Jackson. Cornel West is looking better and better. You got that right, Jackson. He's speaking all types of truth to power, baby, in ways that only Dr. Cornel West can. And Jackson, I want to add to that. You know, folks running on the Republican side and this current president, they're not gonna be able to handle what Dr. Cornel West is gonna put down. They just will not. So I'm with you on that. And so glad also that Marianne Williamson is running, and also, you know, RFK. I don't agree with all of his platform issues and the fact that he does not support Medicare for all as a non-starter for me. But I'm really glad we have 3 people in the race who had the courage to take it to the machine, Jackson. But yeah, there's nobody, and I mean nobody, quite like Dr. Cornel West, baby. Sammy Armani, ooh, I love that. Nina's intro fires me up. Me too, Sammy, especially on days. Sometimes spirit just hits me out of nowhere, because that is one of the coldest intros ever. So thank you, Sammy. And Gary Hilson, war equals money. You got that right. And I don't understand how these people think we're gonna be able to fight our way out of things. I mean, WW3 is not appealing. It means total annihilation. So I'm with you on that, Gary. YouTube super chat, Looney Tunes 9,000. Hey, Looney Tunes 9,000. I just get a smile to my face every time I read your handle. Cornel West for president 2024. I see you trying to start some, Looney Tunes 9,000. Nina Turner for vice president 2024. They ain't ready for that. They really are not ready for that. And Ron DeSantis and Trump and MTU all for prison 2024. Looney Tunes 9,000, baby. You bringing it on that one. I am going to smile for the rest of the day over that. And our TYT members texting. This is Sparta. Anything that doesn't directly support conquest isn't in the budget. You better go ahead and say that, texting. Now you just really simplified the whole interview that I just had Norman about war made invisible. One more again. This is Sparta. Anything that doesn't directly support conquest isn't in the budget. That's where we at now. And Cyber Dragon Lord, Lady Nina Turner in the house, DA house. I am, baby. And you know who else is in the house? Francesca is here. Franny, how you doing, darling? You are on mute. We want to hear everything that you have to say.
That's okay. There was just a motorcycle coming out of my mouth. Just imagine a loud sound of a motorcycle. We're working from home, all the perks. What's going on, Senator? So good to be here, of course. I know we got a lot to get to, so.
We do. So glad that you are here. And we want to thank all of our commenters. Thank you so much for those of you who are able to tune in live. And if you're hearing this after the fact on VOD, video on demand, we thank you for being here too. Make sure you all like and subscribe. That really helps us a lot here on Unbossed, and it helps the TYT family in general. Now we're going straight to workers. A worker paid in oily pennies. Not exaggerating this at all. After complaining about not receiving his final paycheck of $915, a man discovered 91,500 pennies dropped in his driveway. Now, this boss right here was taking petty a little too far. A pay stub with an explicative, I like my good explicatives like anybody else, but a pay stub with an explicative written on it was left on top of the pile of copper coins that were coated with oil. Miles Walker, the owner of A.OK. Walker Auto Works in Peachtree City, decided to pay Andres Platine in pennies on March 12, 2021, after learning the former employee had gone to the US Department of Labor about the missing paycheck. We see a pattern here. I mean, you think? So yeah, so let's take a look at the photograph of the 91,500 pennies to the employee, Flatine. We have another photo to put up here with this right here. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. Now, Walker and his company will pay over $39,000 in back wages and liquidated damages to 9 employees, including Flatine, in response to the lawsuit. An investigation by the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division found that in addition to retaliating against Flatine, the former employee and 8 other workers weren't properly paid for working overtime, officials said. Flatine will be paid over $8,000 in back wages and liquidated damages as part of a federal judge's consent judgment issued on June 13th, which resolves the case, court records show. So Francesca, you want to talk about petty, and this employer is stunned that this employee, the actions by this employer, we get very clearly why the employee went to the Department of Labor.
Yeah, when in doubt, just escalate. Some people only respond to that, and I think that clearly he triggered his former boss. Look at that, just like how much work, the work it took you, the time it took you to put all those pennies in a wheelbarrow and deliver it to someone's home. You could have just written a check. You could have just paid him on time, but no, you're fragile, and so you're gonna do this. And it just proves like we venerate business owners in this country so much, and yet so many of them are not the small business owners. They're like mid to, large business owners, to CEOs of corporations who we somehow think are deserving of all this stuff. No. Often they're trying to literally pinch pennies, trying to cut corners, trying to get one over on their employees, and employees are not having it. And this was a small thing. Okay, I'm going to talk to the Department of Labor, and good on them for actually doing something about it. But it's just, again, it's like, we only venerate the employers and we never actually think about who's doing the real work. Who's the one who's getting, usually 9 times out of 10, getting screwed over, and that's the worker. When are we gonna, it's not a bad thing to be a worker. It's a good thing to be a worker.
It is a good thing, Francesca, and thanks for raising that. We often forget that it is the everyday employee that helps that business that company be as successful as it is, or won't be if you're not treating your employees properly. And so this is a team sport. Owning a company is absolutely a team sport, Francesca.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why we don't get that as a country, and then somehow we believe that CEOs of these companies are deserving of, X times more, 400 times more, 1,000 times more than the very employee that helps keep that company going. And all you have to do, be small, mid, or large, be a good employer.
Right.
That stuff comes back. Most employees, if they're in an environment that edifies them and lifts them, they're gonna pay that forward in ways that helps that company continue to grow and expand. I mean, it's not rocket science, but.
No, but look at those pennies. My first instinct, honestly, was like, if I were a leprechaun, that looks pretty sick. Like, it just looks like, oh, what you find at the end of a rainbow and a lucky charm. Like, and immediately, like my little leprechaun brain. Do we all have a leprechaun brain? I was like, oh, bye. I don't mean any anti-Irish sentiment by that, but I was like,
no, none at all. The leprechaun
come to Papa.
But even if I was a leprechaun, baby, I want to see a lot more than pennies. What I mean? Leprechaun it was the pot of gold, not the barrel.
So the leprechaun gets close and is like
pennies.
It gets real mad and then does the whole leprechaun curse. It's a bad look. It gets worse from there.
It is absolutely a bad look. Shame on that employer, really shame. And thankfully the employees are getting some redress. I think they should have got a whole lot more actually for that behavior. And this company is not the only one. The restaurant hires fake priest. Some of you may have heard this story. A fake priest to exact employee sins, extract, employees sins. We are not making this up. I see a Lifetime movie. The US Department of Labor said an employee testified that an owner who operates 2 locations of the Tequila Gambarli in North California hired a fake priest to hear confessions during work hours and get the sins out. I'm trying to keep it together, y'all. Including asking them if they had been late for work, stolen money from the restaurant, or had bad intentions toward their employer. And this is a real story, you all, real. Let's keep this going. Under oath, an employee of Tequila, again, Baldi, I'm probably butchering that name, explained how the restaurant offered a supposed priest to hear their workplace sins, while other employees reported that a manager falsely claimed that immigration issues would be raised by the department's investigation. I mean, line in the beginning, line in the end. No connection between the fake priest and the Catholic Church. We got to put that out there, okay? Because the real Catholic Church has its own problems, and we don't want to put this problem on the Catholic Church. Again, no connection between the fake priest and the Catholic Church.
This is the one thing they didn't do. They're like, we cannot claim this one. All the other crimes, probably. This one, not. Anyway, keep going.
This one's not us. The Catholic Diocese of Sacramento confirmed that they found no evidence of any connection between the fake priests and their diocese. While we don't know who the person in question was, we are completely confident, exclamation point, bolded, underscored, completely confident he was not a priest of the Diocese of Sacramento. A diocese spokesman told the Catholic News Agency last week, because as Francesca was laying out, we got a whole bunch of sins of our own. We don't want that one on our side. We got to deal with it. So now, the owner and 3 other restaurant owners and operators were ordered to pay $140,000 in back wages and damages to 35 employees. The restaurant will also have to pay $5,000 in civil penalties. This reporting is coming from CNN. And investigators also found that the restaurant denied employees overtime pay. Managers were paid bonuses from the employee tip pool, and some employees faced, quote, adverse immigration consequences, end quote, for cooperating with investigators. Y'all know what? Department of Labor, y'all got to come down with the hammer on these fools. Francesca, what say you?
Again, the lengths. This is great. I love like the theme here, which is petty, bosses. Petty bosses should be a show at this point.
Petty bosses, that's right.
Like the pettiest bosses. You can talk about like tough jobs. What about petty bosses? That's great, right?
That's it.
And this is a perfect example of someone who's like, okay, so I'm a terrible boss. Obviously, I'm withholding wages. I'm dipping into the tip jar of my own employees who are doing the work that I am not doing. In fact, I hired them, and instead of paying them what they deserve, instead of not dipping into their tip jar, I'm gonna actually pay a dude to put on like, a priest thing, the thingy with the big thing. You guys know what I'm talking about.
The thingy.
You put on the thing.
The collar.
And what is it? I'm sorry. Senator, what is he doing? Is he setting up like a little booth in the kitchen? Like, bueno, like I imagine for some reason I'm speaking Spanish because it's taqueria, and I'm like, it's you probably a lot of the people working there are Spanish speakers, and he's just like set up next to like the forks and knives and like the napkins, and they're like, what in the hell? I'm like, what? Is there? I think there's a priest in the kitchen. Really, there's a priest in the kitchen. Yeah, he wants to ask me about like whether I showed up to work on time. Like, okay, cool. Like it's so funny to me. That is so funny.
Hilarious. I mean, it's sad, but it's hilarious at the same time. More than one thing can be true. And you know what, Francesca? I mean, just treat your employees right. I mean, what is the problem with that? You wouldn't have to worry about whether they were stealing stuff or talking against the company. I mean, to me, Francesca, this shows that they got a guilty conscience. They must be guilty as hell. And then this is exploitation of employees. I mean, it really, really is. And I like the show idea, Francesca. I mean, we really need to go ahead. Don't y'all try to take our show idea. Francesca and I
I know. Don't try and
that's
take
our show idea, Francesca.
That's our show idea. This is great.
Bosses.
Petty bosses.
Take that on the road.
And like a tinge of racism too. Like I'm not saying that the owners weren't Latino also, but you're just gonna set up like a confessional booth and think that like your employee, because they're Catholic or Latino, are gonna do like, oh, bueno, okay, and then just like divulge. Come on, you gotta be racist as hell to do that. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you come from. If you're the same community, doesn't matter. That's messed up. And obviously anyone could smell it a mile away.
It's corrupt as hell. And I mean, really, the feds, the hammer, the state government too, the local government. I mean, it's so much that all levels of government can do to make sure that this company and no other company does that to their employees again. It's rotten. I mean, absolutely rotten to the core. Well, here we go. Tlaib, Omar, and Raskin. Speaking of rotten, Congress members, should I say, Tlaib, Omar, and Raskin, they boycott the Modi address. Prime Minister Modi of India is making a visit to Washington, D.C., and his presence is not being welcomed by all. Thank God we have some members of Congress some of the time who are willing to show a spine. The reporting comes from Common Dreams as US President Joe Biden prepared Tuesday to greet Indian Prime Minister Modi for his first state visit to the country since he took office in 2014. At least 3 progressive lawmakers said they will not attend the leader's congressional address in protest of numerous alleged human rights violations by the Modi government. Now, the progressive lawmakers are Representatives Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar and Jamie Raskin. Good on them. A reporter for The Print in New Delhi tweeted out the following. Just in, 70 plus members of the US Congress write to Joe Biden asking him to raise human rights concerns with Prime Minister or PM Modi during the upcoming visit. Also 3 members at Ilhan, at Rashida Tlaib, at Rep Raskin plan to boycott Modi's address to joint Congress. It's good on them. I'm glad that they did that in this report. And Representative Tlaib tweeted this: "It's shameful that Modi has been given a platform at our nation's capital. His long history of human rights abuses, anti-democratic actions targeting Muslims and religious minorities, and censoring journalists is unacceptable. I will be boycotting Modi's joint address in Congress." And here's more to the letter that the 70 Democrats from both chambers sent to President Biden. Raskin was among more than 70 Democrats from both chambers of Congress who wrote to Biden on Tuesday calling on him to make human rights and democratic values a key point of discussion when he meets with Modi. As to why Biden and Modi are meeting, it is the usual Biden administration lip service. Biden has made clear he sees US ties to India, the world's biggest democracy and one of its fastest growing economies. There it is right there, y'all. Just going to rest with fastest growing economies as a defining relationship. New Delhi, as Biden sees it, will be essential to addressing some of the most difficult global challenges in coming years, including climate change, disruptions related to artificial intelligence, and China's growing power in the Indo-Pacific. Francesca, there it is right there. Y'all leave that up. Let's put Francesca up too, because that's it. I mean, that they just basically said why the president is doing this, and it's more on the economic side of the ledger. It has more to do with India's growth and size than anything morally. So, if he has human rights violation, it doesn't matter because India is big and its economy is growing, and we need their help to deal with China.
Absolutely, absolutely. To deal with China in all of the wrong ways, right? This is once again Joe Biden and the administration taking a step in the wrong direction when it comes to foreign policy, especially when it comes to being so-called tough on China, which is only backing China into a corner. It's only severing our ties. It's only prolonging even like the idea of a potential peace negotiation in Ukraine and Russia, right? Which, no matter, who or what side you are on, roads lead through China and relationships should be warming, to say nothing of dealing with global warming in and of itself. But let's set that aside. It is so critical that these Democrats are boycotting, and it is so critical that they're speaking out against the Modi government, who, by the way, Modi gets an audience with the United States Congress before he has met any kind of moral obligation, human rights, obligation to his own people, to the world. So it's like, what are you even gonna say if you bring up human rights violations against the Muslim population, against farmers and workers in India, right? Who have been protesting against all the kinds of things that the Hindu nationalist government that he oversees has been enacting on the Indian people themselves. What's your leverage if he already gets access to the Congress like this? You don't have any. So already it's ridiculous. And I'm so glad that someone like Jamie Raskin stood with the squad on this one, right? I think it's really important. Raskin has a loud voice, he has a leading voice, and he can't be so easily dismissed as, oh, they're crazy progressives. No, 70 Democrats say absolutely not. And we need to hold them accountable. Look, you know what this is, Nina? This is a Trump move. This is a Trump move because Trump loves his authoritarians. Modi is right up there with them.
That's it. And you know what? I'm so glad you said that, Francesca, because I was, talking to a dear friend of mine earlier, text talking, and I just said, pick your authoritarian, pick your dictator personality. For Trump, it was Putin, and the neo-libs had they went crazy about it. and I'm not saying that they shouldn't, I mean, call it out. But if you do care about human rights violations, let's take out the personalities for a minute. See, this is Francesca, this is what I got a problem with. See, these people decide. So since Biden is bringing in Modi, Modi's human rights violations are okay. But Trump and Putin's human rights violations are not okay because Trump is not okay. Modi's human rights violations are okay because Biden is okay. See, this is how some of these people think. And that is the crux of the problem. If we want to talk about humanity, if we want to talk about justice, if we want to talk about love and peace and global, in a global fashion, then we would call out right. When people are right, we say, hey, amen, hooray. And when they wrong, we would say the same thing, regardless of which president is coddling which authoritarian. I don't know, Francesca, maybe it's just me, but that's just how I see it.
No, absolutely. And look, ask any Indian, anyone who is living in the Modi regime, and they will tell you that Modi makes Trump look like a kid on a playground. I mean, he is a kid on a playground, let's be real, but he does make him look even more ridiculous and easygoing than what Modi actually is inside of India.
And it really does highlight our hypocrisy. Really, it is. We picking and choosing. I mean, that's really it. Just wrap your minds around that, folks. We do pick and choose. Now, Modi is ascending, India, and we're talking about this. Here are some of the receipts for Modi's record of violations of human rights and basic democracy, especially when it comes to the treatment of Muslims in the country. Hindu nationalism is a political ideology that seeks the political, legal, and religious supremacy of Hindus, and to undo India's status as a secular state. Modi himself was under a US travel ban for years due to his record as chief minister in 2002, when Hindu mobs killed some 1,000 Muslims. So let us not forget that. This is real. On Modi's rapidly increased attacks on the freedoms of the press in the country, Mr. Modi is taking steps that could replicate this disturbing model on a national scale. His Hindu chauvinist movement, which has normalized intolerance and violence against Indian Muslims, has already put severe pressure on India's core rambunctious press, with journalists surveyed and jailed, and the government using strong arm tactics against media outlets to ensure favorable coverage. So again, pick your autocrat here. Furthermore, the World Press Index of Reporters Without Borders places India at 161, a historic low, down from 150 of the 180 countries it surveys. In the Global Impunity Index of the Committee of Protect Journalists, India ranks 11th with 20 unresolved murders of journalists. So again, good on Representatives Raskin, Omar, and Tlaib for saying, you know what, not only are we against this, not only are we gonna speak out against this with the 70+, we just not going to hear what this prime minister has to say, because really nothing he can say to justify the foolishness and the mayhem that he is lording over in his own country. Good on y'all. Finally, a little spine, just a little bit. Delaware Dems could pass GOP legislation letting businesses vote. Speaking of foolishness and mayhem, Delaware Democrats are now advancing a Republican bill that would allow corporations to directly vote in municipal elections. You heard it right. I know Francesca and I are laying a lot on y'all today. Delaware's Democratic-controlled legislature has been considering a bill to allow the expansion of the franchise to the businesses. Now, let me get this right. We can't even protect the franchise for individuals in this country, but yet in the state of Delaware, where Democrats are in control, they are taking up a Republican policy proposal to make businesses people. Francesca, again, we are really laying out some stuff that is hard to believe, but here we are.
Right, I mean, there's a reason why Delaware's already been like a kind of just like a sandbox for corporations and the rich in terms of their tax code. They don't have state or local sales tax. We know that. I think they have a lower corporate tax rate than other states. And Joe Biden is from there. And it's part of the reason why Biden is seen as a corporate friendly, status quo Joe, not just candidate, not just senator, but president still, right? And I believe it's Chris Coons, right? Am I wrong about this? Who's continuing to do his bidding as a senator from Delaware, being kind of like the not mansion, not cinema. I'm gonna stop your greatest plans to rein in corporations, but I'm gonna be like the low key, backseat on, also being in favor of or being against the Build Back Better agenda, being against all of the ways that you're trying to, lightly slap corporations on the wrist. Delaware is going to be standing up against that. So it's not surprising that now you have this proposal that's a Republican proposal. The Democrats are like, that's good. And look, I don't know the ins and outs of the Delaware state legislature. I don't know. But I do know that in every state legislature around this country, there's corporate money running
remember,
deep.
Francesca, remember when Romney, he was confronted by some people who were out, he was running and they were protesting and Romney was basically saying corporations are people. And I could see the protesting, but they're like, man, they wave their hand. No, this is it. I guess Senator Romney was right. He wasn't the only one that believes that. You got some Democrats that believe it too, that corporations are people, my friend. That's what Romney said. Now the Republican legislation would explicitly permit the city of C4 Delaware to authorize artificial entities, limited liability corporations, partnerships, and trusts to vote in municipal elections. This reporting is coming from The Lever. This tweet right here from the one and only David Sirota. News, Democrats are considering passing new GOP legislation giving corporations the right to vote. The bill follows another state that considered legislation that would have allowed corporations to form their own governments. Hi, I'm in Delaware. I mean, Sirota got that absolutely right. And thank God for The Lever when they put that news out very strongly. This really is all about the money. Follow the money, that's it. That's all. And democracy, what democracy? Who cares about democracy? It doesn't matter. Again, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm has a quote that I love that I don't have memorized, but I swear to you, I love it. I need to paraphrase it, but she said when it comes to money and morality, it's rarely that money loses. And she is absolutely correct. She was correct when she said it, and unfortunately in this 21st century, she is still correct. Oh, we're moving on to Joe Rogan. I mean, we just really piling it on today. I want you to watch this from 2020 when the pandemic was in its early stages.
Hope this wakes people up to the value of vaccines too. There's so many wackos out there that think that vaccines are, a scam or they're dangerous or there's so many people out there that won't vaccinate their children.
I know. I think that's really an important point that, we got to get this idea. These vaccines can be life-saving. If we had one right now, think how different the situation would be in we're in right now.
It would be radically different. But then you see the measles making a comeback and directly attributed to a lack of vaccine.
My, have times changed. And I was Spotify podcaster and host of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe Rogan. And here's Joe Rogan just 2 years later.
If you're like 21 years old and you say to me, should I get vaccinated? I go, no.
Yeah.
Are you healthy? Are you a healthy person? Like, look, don't do anything stupid, but you should take care of yourself. You should, if you're a healthy person and you're exercising all the time and you're young and you're eating well, and like, I don't think you need to worry about this.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you.
But there's a lot of jobs that will tell you need to have this.
Well, that's what's starting to happen now.
People are worried about them doing it for their children.
Now, certainly Joe Rogan, I mean, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, and Joe Rogan is no exception to that, but you're not entitled to your own set of facts. And that said, you might be wondering what made the shift. Well, like following a politician's trajectory, one has to follow the money. This headline last week from Vice, Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation. And the reason why they're doing that is all for the money. This is it. Follow the money. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the green road paved in money. But you know what? Bill Barr had a thing or two to say to Joe Rogan. Watch this.
Walk down the street with a mask on?
Let's not start this, Joe.
Do you though?
Let's not start this. Okay.
Let's start it.
I don't want to start this. I'm not going to sit here with no medical degree, listening to you with no medical degree, with an American flag behind you, smoking a cigar, acting like we know what's up better than the CDC.
There it is. We're not going to start this. Francesca, I think Bill Barr really wrapped up the segment for us.
Yeah. Bill Barr is a different one.
I'm sorry, Bill Burr.
He's so Christ. No. The only thing I'm going to say is on Spotify is that, look, Spotify said that it was okay. It's okay that Rogan continues to spout this vaccine misinformation because he's not saying that the COVID-19 vaccine was designed to make people sick. He's just saying that it does make people sick and that's the side effect and maybe they do die, which is such bad faith corporate BS. They're not gonna get rid of their cash cow. They love him and they'll let him do whatever he wants. It doesn't matter that his listeners are at risk.
That's it. Do whatever he wants, say whatever he wants. That was Bill Burr. Sorry, you guys. I don't know why I got Bill Barr on my mind. Bill Burr on the mind. I messed it up with Jordan Ewell yesterday, and here I am today. Well, that is our time. It has been an absolute pleasure to have Francesca on the show today. Can't wait till we're together again. And thanks to all of you for joining us. You know what I want to do? Well, I want you to do. I always want you to keep the faith. But baby, with that faith, you have to couple it with some fight. Until next time.